Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, we're going to talk about the player that the Wolves most need to step up if they're going to maintain a top four seed in the West. Speaking of the top four, we'll also talk about some first round potential matchups, good and bad for the Wolves. We'll look at Wolves Clippers too. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure might be around that next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. Hello and welcome in and happy Tuesday, everybody. It's also a game day. We'll take on the Clippers tonight. We'll get to that a little bit later in the show. A lot to get to first. Want to talk a little bit about the player who I think really a lot hinges on here over the next several weeks, at least in terms of the Wolves maintaining their top four spot in the Western Conference. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then also the standings, potential first round matchups, just real briefly. Obviously, as we get closer here, we're roughly 30 days from the end of the regular season. We'll talk a little more in depth about some of the potential first round matchups for Minnesota. But now that it's pretty clear the Wolves could land anywhere from 1 to 4, and theoretically they could slip to 5. That would be a pretty dramatic fall. And I don't think that'll happen, but not the easiest schedule upcoming either. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll close with some thoughts on Wolves Clippers as well. So lots to get to today. A big thank you here off the top for making Locked on Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find this show. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. That's on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. I also want to remind about the postcast. Not only do we cover your team every day, but we're also giving you instant episodes after every single game. Of course, you can check out the Locked On Wolves postcast. You can get the audio right here on the Locked On Wolves podcast feed. You can also stream on the Locked On Minnesota YouTube channel. You can get rapid reaction to all the biggest moments with the Locked On Wolves postcast. I'll actually be hosting this evening late following Wolves Clippers. I think it's a 9 p.m. tip. So go live probably a little before midnight Central Time with Jack Borman on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. It's usually hosted by Luke Inman, but I'll be hosting this evening along with Jack, the editor-in-chief at Canis Hoopus. So be sure to tune in tonight. And if you can't catch it live or if you can't stay up to the end of the game, I get that. But you can also listen right here on this feed on Wednesday, or I guess whenever you want to listen, but it'll be posted to the audio overnight here at Locked On Wolves. All right. Let's talk about the player who I don't want to say I'm most concerned about, but I would say the Wolves need the most from beyond what they're getting currently. Because if you just say the most important player, obviously Anthony Edwards. Rudy Gobert is probably a close second in terms of, we saw what happened when Rudy wasn't on the floor against the Lakers on Sunday. They need Rudy Gobert desperately. But if those guys are on the floor and they do mostly what they've done this year, the Wolves will be okay. There aren't very many guys on the roster who haven't lived up to what our expectations were coming in. Kyle Anderson would be one. Although he's played better post-trade deadline, and obviously he was hurt and missed the game Sunday, he'd probably be the other one. Naz Reid has been what everyone expected, maybe a little better. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, same thing. Mike Conley, pretty much the same thing. Probably overall this year has been better. I would say the player that the Wolves need the most from, that they're not getting it at this point in time, is Jaden McDaniels. Jaden McDaniels has basically turned in the same season this year as he did last year, but he's not shooting the ball as well. And depending on where you look, defensive metrics aren't necessarily in agreement about his defense this year. I do think he's gotten even more difficult assignments so far this season, McDaniels has. I don't know that his defense has been any better. In fact, I would say, I'll just say that, let's start there. I think McDaniels' defense, the sum of it is probably about what it was last year, but I think it's been higher variance. I don't know that he's been as consistent this season, and I don't like. It's more of just a night in and night out thing where there's nights he gets blown by quite a bit, and there's other nights he's the same old seatbelt that Wolves fans have come to love. Right? There's just less consistency from Jaden McDaniels. It's volatile. It's high variance. And while that leads to spectacular moments and he can step up in big moments against big time opponents, the consistency has not been there. And it's been partly papered over, certainly by Rudy Gobert, but also Nickeil Alexander-Walker being as good as he has been. And the Wolves just having really good defensive personnel. Ant stepping up big. Mike Conley and Kyle Anderson, veterans that are strong team defenders. Now Monte Morris, when healthy, would fall into that same category. So I don't think the defense has been as otherworldly as the Wolves expected it to be. Everywhere else, he's the same or worse than he was a year ago. In fact, this isn't like the only way to evaluate a player, but it's a bit damning if you look at just look at the advanced stats box on Basketball Reference at all of his rate-based stats. Every single one of them, except for his turnover rate, has gone in the wrong direction. His offensive rebound rate is down. His defensive rebound rate is way down. His total rebound rate is down. His assist rate is down. His steal rate is down slightly. His block rate is easily the worst of his career, and it's gone down consistently. Rookie year to second year to third year to fourth year, the block rate continues to tumble. Turnover rate is down slightly, but his usage rate is also down. Okay? Every single one of those numbers is going in the wrong direction. His three-point percentage after an 0-5 showing against the Lakers on Sunday is down 4.7 points year over year. His overall field goal percentages, too, I would prefer to break it down 3-point and 2-point. 2-point percentage is actually up slightly. And if you look at his shot distribution, I was surprised by this. I was expecting to be unhappy with his shot distribution, but he's actually shooting more threes this year, and he's not shooting a whole lot more from the mid-range. He's shooting a little more from that 10 to 16-foot range and 0.3% more from the 3 to 10-foot range. That doesn't really bother me. I'd rather him be more aggressive putting the ball on the floor, and he has seemingly been more comfortable doing that this year, and that's a good thing. So I actually think the shot selection hasn't been all that bad. He just isn't getting to the line as much, which is a little bit weird because I think he's been more aggressive. The free throw rate is actually a career worst for McDaniels. And while he's shooting more threes, he's making them at a worse clip. So he's shooting like per game. He's getting to the line almost one free throw less per game. He went from 1.8 free throws a game to 1. So that's essentially a point there that's being shaved off. His efficiency from three, even though he's shooting more in terms of rate, he's shooting the same number per game, and he's shooting them at almost 5 points worse from outside the arc. So the offensive numbers are all going in the wrong direction. Even if the actual feel of the game, I don't feel like is necessarily worse. He's just not making shots at the same clip he was last year. And it was part of my concern coming out of last season. I was worried that there'd be some regression because remember, just 2 years ago, he was under 32% from outside the arc. And he wasn't putting the ball on the floor and being aggressive. And the assist rate was 6%. All that stuff is up since then. But he's just not, even though the threes were way better last year, now he's settled right in between. He's smack dab in the middle of where he shot threes in terms of percentage 2 years ago and where he was last year. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised. The problem is that, especially now with no Karl-Anthony Towns, and in a game like against the Lakers the other day with no Rudy either, and no Kyle Anderson, McDaniels gets pressed into doing other things. He's having to play more at the 4 instead of the 3, which he barely has done this year at all. In fact, he nearly doubled the number of possessions he's played at the 4 just with the game against the Lakers. And he's also career worst rebounding, like not even close, just a horrific rebounding year so far for Jaden McDaniels. And he's being pressed into playing the 4, and teams are just playing off of him. We talked about this extensively on Monday on the post-game pod. That's what the Lakers did, is they played Anthony Davis essentially at free safety, playing off of Jaden McDaniels, and were daring McDaniels to beat them, and he couldn't do it. Now, a lot of times just being aggressive and making a couple of baskets will, cause the opponent to think about that coverage differently. That didn't happen in this game. Maybe it happens next time out, right? Like Jaden's still a capable offensive player, and like I said, he's improved in some areas. But to have him regress in all of those areas across the board, rebounding, and then some of the defensive metrics, steal rate, block rate, etc., and then also shooting almost 5 points worse from outside the arc is a problem. And if this team wants to get out of the first round, like, let's just call it what it is now. We're going to talk a little bit about this next. Like, they got to get out of the first round, and that's the first challenge. They need Jaden McDaniels to do more than, go over 5 from 3 and pull down 3 boards in a game, right? Like, they need more from Jaden McDaniels. And it's simply shot making when it comes to 3-pointers. I think he's picking his spots okay on offense. Again, the shot selection, the decision making is fine. It's not incredible growth, but it's fine. He's just got to make more shots, and he's got to be more consistent defensively, and he has to rebound the ball. He just has to. That's been the number one issue with him. You take the body work over almost 4 full seasons, and that's been the biggest problem with Jaden McDaniels is the lack of rebounding. All right. I want to get into some of the potential first-round matchups, not spend a ton of time on any one of them necessarily, but just kind of talk about, like, sitting here right now with the Wolves second in the West, what is this thing shaking out to be? Or actually, technically, the Wolves are now third in the West. They're half game behind Denver after Denver's most recent win. And actually, as I'm recording this, Denver's about to beat the Raptors. So they're going to be 2 games behind, or a full game behind Denver, I should say. So we'll talk a little bit about what the first round could be shaping up to be. We'll do that here next, and then we'll close with some Wolves Clippers talk. Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you, and it's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. So today, I want to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking about the same thing this week, and that is the Wolves being unable to break out of this vicious cycle of referee complaining and experiencing the wrath of the referees, because once again, the Wolves were massively out free throwed on Sunday against the Lakers. And yes, at this point, a lot of it's their own doing. By the way, the Wolves were top 10 in defensive free throw rate for a long time this year. They're now 17th. They're plummeting because it's catching up to them in terms of their overall defense. It's still obviously the number 1 defense in the league, but they're allowing teams to shoot dozens of free throws a game. And it's partly their own doing. It's partly, this not seeing eye to eye with the officials, I think, is probably a very polite way of putting what happened with Rudy on Friday. And it's a problem. And it goes both ways. It's not only the Wolves' problem. It's not only the officiating. It's both. And it's a serious problem for Minnesota here moving forward. Now, therapy looks different for everyone. And surely there are bigger problems out there than my take on the Wolves' officiating issues. But it's still important to get things off your chest every once in a while. And frankly, that's been on my chest now for, I don't know, call it multiple decades at this point. All that to say, if you're thinking of starting therapy, consider giving BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible, and it's suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, let's talk about the Western Conference standings and where the Wolves sit right now. So, exiting play on Tuesday, entering play Wednesday would be a better way to say that. The Wolves are going to be 1 game behind the Denver Nuggets for number 2 in the West and 2 full games behind the OKC Thunder. I'm sorry, no. 1.5 games behind the OKC Thunder for first place in the West. So there'll be a game behind the Nuggets. The Nuggets will be half game behind the Thunder. The Wolves will be 1.5 behind OKC. Of course, they split the season series with OKC. They're 1-0 against the Nuggets with 3 games still to play against them. The Clippers are 2 games behind Minnesota. And the Wolves have won 2 out of the 3 games against the Clippers. They, of course, play the Clippers on tonight, Tuesday night. Okay, and then there's still a gap. The Pelicans and Clippers, there's 2.5 games that separate the Clippers and the Pelicans for 4 and 5 in the West. So there's still a clear top 4. And if the Wolves beat the Clippers on Tuesday night, it's a really big game. They will create 3 games of separation and effectively 4 because they'll also have the tiebreaker against LA. So they'll be in great shape in terms of staying in the top 3 if they can beat the Clippers on Tuesday. But if they lose, there's no tiebreaker and they're only up by 1 game. So it's actually a really big game for the Wolves on Tuesday night. You can bet that Ant is going to play. I know he's listed as questionable. Gobert is going to do everything he can to play. I know I don't really have a good handle on how serious the Monte Morris thing, given how quickly they've been ruling him out. They're probably going to be very cautious with that. With only 2 games this week, it's just Tuesday and Saturday. The Wolves have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday off between LA and Utah. So it wouldn't shock me if they're cautious here with Monte Morris. I'm not sure about Kyle Anderson. That one's tough. There's not a whole lot to go off of with that one at this point. But all that to say, it's a really big game against the Clippers. After that, the Pelicans are in 5th. They're a game and a half up on the Suns, who are in 6th. Then there's another game gap between the play-in teams, which are pretty locked in. The Rockets are 5 games behind the Warriors. Şengün's hurt now, although it thankfully doesn't look like it's too serious, but he's going to be out a little while, I would think. So there's pretty much your like 5 to 10 seeds are locked in. It's just a matter of who avoids the play-in. But if it shakes out as it currently looks, which I think it's going to be pretty similar, the Wolves right now, if the playoffs started today, would be taking on the Phoenix Suns in the first round, which I don't love. I really don't love that at all. Minnesota does not match up all that well with Phoenix. And actually, here's the problem in my mind. Minnesota actually matches up better with the very top and the very bottom of the likely Western Conference playoff picture. I like how they match up with the Thunder. I know they split 4 games, but I don't mind that matchup. I think over the course of the series, the Wolves' size would wear down the Thunder. Now, SGA is obviously horrifying to play against. He's so good. And that, of course, OKC's number 1 in the West for a reason, and Denver's number 2 for a reason, and they're reigning champs for a reason. But the Wolves match up better against OKC and Denver, and the Clippers for that matter, than they do against the Pelicans, Suns, and Kings, who are all directly below the Wolves. So the Wolves are in that group of OKC, Denver, Clippers. All those matchups are advantageous for Minnesota. Tough teams, obviously, better teams than the other teams that I'm listing, but they match up better. The Pelicans are scary to me. The Suns, the Wolves don't match up great with. The Kings has been a bit hit or miss, and I think of all these teams I'm listing, I'd rather play the Kings than the Pelicans or Suns, but the Kings aren't a great matchup either. I like how the Wolves match up with the Mavs, a full-strength Wolves team. I like how they match up with the Lakers and Warriors too, actually. So really, the bottom 3 and the top 3 teams are the teams that I like the matchups the most. The teams that I'm most worried about are the middle 3, the Pelicans, Suns, and Kings. And right now, if Minnesota stays in 3, they're going to play the 6th seed. It's very likely going to be the Pelicans, Suns, or Kings. If they move up a spot, they're going to take on the 7th seed. That could be anybody at this point, but it's from that Kings, Mavs, Lakers, Warriors group most likely. If they go down a spot and they're in the Clippers spot, the 4 spot, they're very likely going to face the Pelicans, Suns, or Kings, or maybe even the Clippers. Initially, I was like, I don't know if it matters 1 through 4 as long as you get home court. But now I'm starting to think that 1 or 2 is that much more important. And again, we don't know how the play-in shakes out, but I do not want the Wolves to have to face the Pelicans, Suns, or Kings in the first round. I would much rather face the Mavs, Lakers, Warriors. And if you get up to number 2, that's the more likely scenario. You may still have the Kings, but I think the Wolves could handle that matchup. The Suns thing, the Wolves have only seen the Suns once. That was November 15th. It was like 4 months ago. The Wolves last saw the Suns, and it was that back-to-back after playing, I think, in LA the night before. The Wolves got blown out in Phoenix on that road back-to-back. It was the Wolves' first back-to-back of the year. They don't play them again until April 5th. They're going to go nearly 5 months between playing one of their Western Conference opponents in the Phoenix Suns. April 5th, and then they play them again April 14th, which I believe is the Wolves' last regular season game. Is that true? It is. Weird. They play them at Phoenix on Friday, April 5th, which is the 6th to last game of the year. And then they finish the season with a matinee at home, the only home game they play against the Suns all year, on April 14th, a 2:30 p.m. game, which hopefully won't matter for seeding at that point, but you never know. So all that to say, this Clippers game is very important because if they beat the Clippers, they effectively have a four game lead on the 3 spot in the West. And whether they finish first, second, or third, I would much rather get to first or second. I don't care if it's number 1, number 2 is fine. I don't want them to be in number 3 because then you're right in that Pelicans, Suns, Kings range. So let's get up to 2 or let's get to 1. It'd be much better than 3 or 4 in my opinion. All right, let's close the show with the Wolves-Clippers preview as the Wolves take on the Clippers for the 4th and final time. That's tonight at Crypto.com Arena. Let's preview that matchup here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure might be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class-exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Nissan's incredible lineup also includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder. It has room up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. All right, on Tuesday night, the Timberwolves take on the LA Clippers for the 4th and final time of the season. They won the first 2 meetings. And then last time around, they lost that barn burner of an 89-88 game, although compared to that, what was it, Knicks-Sixers on Sunday, that was like the lowest scoring game in 7.5 years in the NBA. Crazy. But anyway, the Wolves lost by a single point to the Clippers just over a week ago. It was like a week ago Sunday, I believe. And that was a game where, the Wolves did a pretty good job on Paul George. They did a great job on James Harden, and defensively were very good, but they could not get out of their own way offensively. Cat had 18, 9, and 8 in this one. Edwards had 27 points on 20 shots, and Rudy had 12 and 16 and 3 blocks. The Wolves, well, okay, let's say it this way. So the frustrating thing about this game, there were a couple things that were frustrating. One, the Wolves dominated in the paint. They were plus 14 on the glass. They won every category you would want to win when it comes to paint, defense, etc. But they turned it over 15 times themselves, which is a major problem. Cat, Conley, and Ant each had 3 turnovers in that game. And they held James Harden without a field goal, without a made field goal in this game. He had 4 points, 4 made free throws, 0 of 10 shooting, and 0 of 6 outside the arc was James Harden. And the Wolves still managed to lose this game. Remember, they got up huge early, 30-18 at the end of the first quarter. The Clippers had the big second quarter. And then, down the stretch, this was, the whole thing was physical. It was kind of like no holds barred, the whole thing down the stretch in this game. And, and also remember, Russell Westbrook didn't play. This was right after he got hurt. And of course, he's still out. But Ivica Zubac was good for them. The Clippers just decided, remember 2 games ago against the Wolves, they played ultra small and it didn't work. But actually, no, Zubac was fine. He started the game, but then it was Daniel Tice that actually was really difficult for Minnesota. And while the Wolves won the rebounding battle by 14, Tice had 13 rebounds himself. He had, a third of the rebounds total for the Clippers were Daniel Tice off the bench. That matchup was difficult for the Wolves. And Minnesota just never got offense going. And in the times when they beat the Clippers, they hung 121 on the Clippers the time before that. It was another really good Cat game, a super efficient game. Ant didn't play well offensively, but Rudy had a big game. That was when the Clippers tried to go small, and the Wolves blew them out in LA 2 games ago. And in the first matchup, it was a much closer game. And this was one of the first games in that big, or I guess it was early January. So it was after the Clippers had started that massive run, with Paul George and Kawhi and James Harden, and were dominating everybody. And the Wolves shut down. I'm like, James Harden has not played well at all against the Wolves this year. And Minnesota in that game, full strength, at least in terms of their starting lineup, Ant had 33 on 16 shots, and the Wolves won that one by 4. I don't mind the Clippers matchup because the Wolves can have Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Anthony Edwards guard the Clippers' big three in terms of perimeter players. The Wolves can play big and they can play small. Now, playing big becomes more difficult, certainly if Rudy's not available. But even bruised and battered, like the Clippers are clearly the favorites in this game. Like they should win this game against a shorthanded Timberwolves team. But assuming Rudy plays, the Wolves should be in this game because they have the perimeter firepower to combat the Clippers. Right now, the Clippers are 6-point favorites over at FanDuel. It's in LA. The Wolves have all the injuries. The Clippers are relatively healthy. But the key for me is doing what you did to James Harden last time, which I know is easier said than done, but be physical with him, force the ball out of his hands, make him be a playmaker. And that's, a step in the right direction. The other thing is the Clippers offense, like it's a top 5 offense, and the Wolves with Rudy Gobert have been able to slow it down by running those guys off the 3-point line. And Harden's one of them, but I mean, the Clippers are number 2 in the league in 3-point shooting. The Wolves are, I believe, number 3. I'm going to check that. Yeah, the Wolves are number 3. The Clippers are number 2 in 3-point shooting. So there's a lot about these teams that's eerily similar. But the Wolves have to keep the Clippers off the free throw line. And I mentioned this in the last segment, or maybe it was 2 segments ago. But the Wolves are now just 17th in defensive free throw rate. They're fouling a ton. The Clippers are top 10 in terms of drawing fouls and getting to the line, offensive free throw rate. So the Wolves need to do their best to defend without fouling, not get sucked into playing the foul game, not get sucked into the officiating games, run the Clippers off the line, defend with their feet, not their hands, move their feet, stay in front of people, don't grab, all that stuff. The Clippers are a pretty mediocre rebounding team. So again, with Gobert, the Wolves should be able to control the paint. Without Gobert, it becomes a lot more difficult. Daniel Tice and Ivica Zubac become a lot scarier if you don't have size and depth yourself to combat that. Now, neither Paul George or Kawhi Leonard played against Milwaukee on Sunday. They're both listed as questionable for the game against the Wolves. Of course, no Russell Westbrook. I would anticipate everyone that's questionable to play just simply because this is a really big game. The Clippers want to draw within a game of the Wolves. The Wolves want to build what would effectively be a 4-point lead, or 4-game lead, a 3-game lead plus the 3-1 tiebreaker in the West over the Clippers by winning this game. It's a huge game. So expect anybody that's questionable to try and suit up in this one, because remember, the Wolves also have the next 3 days off. They're off Wednesday, Thursday, Friday before playing a pair of games in Salt Lake City. So look for the Wolves to try and get everybody out there as much as they can in this one. All right. That's all we have for you today. A reminder, we'll have the live postcast that I'll be hosting tonight following Wolves Clippers. Also, if you can't watch the game live, you can listen over on SiriusXM. Of course, Alan Horton, every bucket from Wolves Clippers on the hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Minnesota Timberwolves to check out Wolves Clippers. Again, that's 9 p.m. Central this evening on the SXM app, and the live postcast over at Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube, and then the audio here at Locked On Wolves. The game, of course, is on TNT, nationally televised. So we'll see. We'll see if that also influences who's available to play for both teams as well. All right, that's all we have for today here on the show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves, and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.